Hi everyone, thank you so much for connecting with me today. Appreciate you giving me a few minutes of your day today. So we're on, I think, week 5 of our discussion. Our series called How to Pray is based on Pete Greig's book called How to Pray. That's why we called it that. And if you want to read the chapter, we're on chapter, I think it's chapter 7 called Unanswered Prayer Today. Or if you want to watch the video, it's the week 5 video. Just scan the QR code here on the screen. Okay, so today we're talking about life, right? We're talking about life that sometimes is hard. We probably have all lived long enough to know that sometimes life is tough. Life is hard. Sometimes we face situations that are beyond our ability to control, right? And in those moments, what do? We reach out to a higher power and we ask God for help. So when we receive a diagnosis, from the doctor, we call out to God, ask him for help. When we have financial problems, what do? We call out to God and we say, please, can you help me with this, right? Relationship problems, things that are outside of our ability to control, we call out to a higher power. And in those moments, it's a beautiful thing that we can do that, and we have a sense of comfort and strength that we gain from prayer. And sometimes the things that we ask God for, they actually do happen, right? So sometimes that person is healed, or they get the medical help that they need and they live a long life. But friends, listen, other times the things that we're asking God for, they don't happen, or at least they don't happen in the way that we want it to. And so in those moments, what do we do with that, right? How do we respond when the thing that we sometimes desperately are asking God for doesn't happen? When Kathy and I were just really young in ministry and young in our marriage, we were pastoring at a church, and there was a young family pretty close to our age, husband, wife, and 2 young children, and the husband got cancer. And we as a church community were praying, and his wife was just desperate. Like I can't overemphasize how desperate she was for her husband to live. And as the cancer continued to progress and he continued to deteriorate, her desperation grew, and he ultimately passed away, right? And she was so desperate and she was so full of faith that God was going to heal her husband, right? She was so desperate and so full of faith that even when he died, she refused to believe that he was going to stay dead, to the point where she actually brought his shoes to the funeral. She brought his shoes to the funeral, expecting that he was going to rise to life out of that coffin and she would have his shoes there waiting for him. When the service was done, the funeral service was done, she was not deterred. She brought his shoes to the graveside service. She had, I'll use the word faith, to believe that her husband was going to rise from the dead. And when his casket was lowered into the ground, and when the dirt went on top of his casket, and it was evident that he was not going to come to life again, she was destroyed. Her faith was destroyed. She was destroyed because she had so much faith. And she knew what she wanted, right? Anybody would want their husband and the father of their young children to live, right? So here's the question that we're going to talk about at our gathering on Sunday. And if you can't be with us, here's the question that I invite you to process. How do we reconcile our faith with our disappointment? How do we reconcile faith with disappointment when our prayers seem to go answered, or when God's answers don't align with our desires and expectations? Friends, that's a very, very significant question. And, we've lived long enough to know that sometimes in small things, things that we ask for don't happen, but sometimes really, really significant things, like this young father passing away, sometimes really significant things don't happen. And in those moments, how do we reconcile our faith with our disappointment when our prayers don't seem to go answered? Or seem to go unanswered, or when God's answers don't align with our desires and expectations, okay? There are no easy answers to this, and I would never attempt to give a flippant, easy answer. But I appreciated in the book Pete Greig's perspective in terms of three things, and I won't say much about it because he explains it well in the book. But three things: sometimes it can be answered in God's world, in God's war, and in God's will. God's world, just the broken world that we live in, and our broken human bodies that deteriorate. God's world. God's war, that we're at war with an enemy who wants to steal, kill, and destroy, and sometimes that enemy gains the upper hand in a particular situation. And also mysteriously God's will, that sometimes we don't understand it, but it's just God's will to do or not do things, and we won't understand probably until we get to heaven, right? So how do we reconcile our faith with our disappointment when our prayers seem to go unanswered, or when God's answers don't align with our desires and expectations, right? Okay, in the book, I thought it was interesting that Pete Greig referred to three of Jesus's prayers that went unanswered. And the third, or maybe the first or something, I forget what order they were, but he talked about Jesus's prayer at Gethsemane that caught my attention, and I'd like to use that as a springboard for our conversation today, okay? Jesus's prayer at Gethsemane, just hours before he died. Okay, so let's set the stage here. Most of Jesus's life and ministry was in northern Israel, up around the Sea of Galilee, Lake Galilee, and in the last days of Jesus's life, Jesus knew exactly the day that he was going to die on. He had that date circled on his calendar. If he had a Google Calendar on his phone, he would have had that event in bright red, or something. Like, he knew the day that he was going to die, and it was tied to Passover and the symbolism of Passover, and also the temperature, the rhetoric with the religious leaders was really heating up. Jesus knew that he was going to die. And in the weeks leading up to his death, he tried his best to help his disciples understand that I have to die, right? I'm going to die. And they just couldn't get it. And Jesus knew the kind of death that he was going to, right? He had seen criminals be crucified on a cross before. He knew the position of hanging on a cross and your rib cage pressing in on your lungs. He knew that he was going to literally suffocate to death, right? He knew the anguish that he would be in as he carried the sin of the world on his shoulders, right? And even more than the physical suffering, but the spiritual suffering of carrying the sin of the world on his shoulders. Jesus knew what he was signed up for, right? He knew the gruesome, painful suffering that was lined up for him, right? And in the hours before he died, he lost my place in my notes. In the hours before he died, he goes to Gethsemane. He's had the Last Supper with his disciples. He leaves Jerusalem. He goes down into the valley to Gethsemane, to the olive press, and there in the garden, in the olive grove, he's praying, right? And he knows what awaits him just a few hours later, in Jerusalem. And he is grieving over this. I mean, we can't underestimate the level of grief. In fact, Mark 14 34, it says that Jesus' soul was crushed with grief to the point of death. Crushed with grief to the point of death. I mean, he's really wrestling with this. Luke 22:44, Jesus was in agony of spirit. Agony of spirit, that his sweat fell to the ground like great drops of blood. Jesus is tortured by the thought, by the knowledge of the death that he is about to endure, right? He's tortured by this in grief to the point of death, in agony of spirit, right? And he has one last little kind of focused prayer time with his Father. And in this moment, he prays an incredibly honest prayer. Incredibly honest prayer. And he says, Lord, if it is possible, can we do this some other way? Mark 14. I'm going to actually read the story from two different perspectives, from Mark's and from Luke. Mark 14, when they went to the olive grove called Gethsemane, and Jesus said, sit here while I go and pray. He took Peter, James, and John with him, and he became deeply troubled and distressed. Deeply troubled and distressed. He told them, my soul is crushed with grief to the point of death. Stay here and keep watch with me. He went on a little further and fell to the ground. He prayed that if it were possible, the awful hour awaiting him might pass him by. Abba, Father, he cried out, everything is possible for you. Please take this cup of suffering away from me. Yet I want your will to be done and not mine. Same story from a different perspective in Luke. Jesus walked away and about a stone's throw and knelt down and prayed, Father, if you are willing, please take this cup of suffering away from me. Yet I want your will to be done, not mine. Then an angel from heaven appeared and strengthened him. He prayed more fervently, and he was in such agony of spirit that his sweat fell to the ground like great drops of blood. And friends, we know the end of the story, right? Jesus is asking here, is there any other way? And we know the end of the story, that there wasn't any other way, and Jesus did suffer a terrible, painful death, right? And so if Jesus's prayer went unanswered, actually, can I just say that we talk about prayers being unanswered, but often we do get the answer. The problem isn't the prayer doesn't get answered. The problem is the prayer gets answered in a way that we don't want, in a way that doesn't meet our desires, right? And so what can we learn about Jesus's posture in this prayer, a prayer that didn't go the way that he wanted, right? What can we learn? My first thought is, can be summarized in this word, love. Love. Have you ever had a painful situation, like a really painful situation, and in your moment of distress, it feels like God is a million miles away? Right? I think maybe we've all experienced that in our moment of distress. It feels like God has abandoned us. It feels like he's a million miles away. In fact, Mark 15:34, Jesus felt this, my God, why have you abandoned me? And it's natural, friends, listen, it's natural to feel abandoned by God when we're in moments of distress, right? But that in those moments, God has not abandoned us, right? And in those moments, some people in their moment of distress, they feel like God is a million miles away, and they reject God in those moments. Like, why would God allow this to happen? This is unfair. And I reject God in those moments. I'm going my own way, right? But Jesus doesn't reject God in that moment, the Father in that moment. In fact, he reaches out in loving intimacy. He says, Abba, Father, in Mark 14:36, Abba, Father, he cried out. Do you remember a few weeks ago, we said that there are two different words that Jesus used to refer to his Father? The first was pater, pater as in paternity, and that is that, and he prayed that in the Lord's Prayer, our Father, our pater, and that word pater is like the provider of the home, the nourisher, the founder of the home. It's a position of strength, and could be not just a male-female thing, but could be a maternal figure that is that pater figure, that provider, that source of strength. It's not just about men and women. And so Jesus referred to his Father as pater, that strength position. But here he doesn't refer to the Father as pater, that nourisher, that provider. He refers to Abba, Father. Abba, Father, is like Papa God. It's like Daddy. It's in his moment of pain and sorrow and distress that he calls out, "Oh, Daddy," like Papa, Abba, Father, please help me here. Friends, in moments of distress, in moments of pain, in moments of sorrow, this is not the time to reject God. Even though we may feel like God is far away, God, I promise you, God is not far away. Just like when our children are hurting, what do? We wrap our arms around them and we love them and we support them. When you're hurting, God the Father, our Abba, wraps his arms of love around you. And I think it's really significant that Jesus used this word Abba when he was in his worst moment. So what do we learn from Jesus' posture in prayer? Oh man, my time is going quickly. I need to move. What do we learn from Jesus' posture? First of all, love. Quickly, comfort. When we feel like God is far away and we're in distress, it can feel cold and lonely. But in Luke 22, verse 43, it says that an angel from heaven appeared and strengthened Jesus in his moment of distress, right? That's the moment that we reach out to God in love and receive his comfort and his strength. The third thing I think we learn, it can be summarized in the word surrender. And this is really where we land today. Of course, we know that in Jesus' prayer, he's wrestling with it. He's saying, if there's any other way. But then what does he say? Abba, Father, he cried out, everything is possible for you. Please take this cup of suffering away from me. Yet I want your will to be done and not mine. Surrendering to the will of God. And friends, if we learn nothing else, I think we can learn that God loves us. He actually wants what's best for us, even when we're suffering and even when things don't go our own way. And we can learn that we can actually surrender to God and to his will, and that even though we don't understand it, somehow in his mysterious way, he can turn those things, turn beauty to ashes, right? To use Old Testament language, he can turn those things into something beautiful, even when it stings the most. We can learn to surrender to God when we're in agony of spirit, just like Jesus. Okay, so I need to go. My time is up. Hope that we can see you on Sunday, and I hope that you have a fantastic day. God bless you, friends.